Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar here at D2. Today we are going to be talking about preparing for the board meeting and the board chair's role in it. So I got Daryl with me. How you doing, Daryl?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this presentation.
Yeah, it should be a good one. So I think today you're going to cover a few different parts of the topic, right? So we've got everything from the role, what they need to do in the meeting, all those different parts, right, Daryl?
Absolutely. This is very important for an effective board meeting.
Awesome. So I see we've got some folks joining us today. So welcome. We're glad you're here. This is a Q&A. So if you want to toss some questions down in the comments as we go, we are definitely going to have a time where we're going to answer those. And there's no one better to answer them than Daryl, because he is our resident expert. So Daryl, without further ado, why don't you take us into the world of preparing for the board meeting?
Thanks very much, Jeremy. I'm looking forward to this. It's very important that the board meeting be as effective as possible, and the preparation process is probably the foundational piece to an effective board meeting. So welcome everybody, and let's get started. Let's get right into this. Let's first ask the question, why is a board meeting so important to the board anyways? I've touched on this in previous webinars, and I just want to touch base with it again just a little bit, and to say that the board meeting is arguably the most important governance responsibility of the board of directors. The reason, though, is that all key strategic decisions and activities by the board are done at the board meeting. And most of the key stakeholders of the organization are very interested in just how effective the board is, particularly the board meetings. Donors are very keenly interested, and if they sense that the board meeting is a bit disruptive or not functioning as well as it should be, they may well withdraw all or part of their funding. And it makes it difficult also to keep board members and or to attract new board members if the board meetings are dysfunctional. So this is a very important process, and preparing for the meetings is extremely important. The board of directors ultimately have the responsibility to ensure that these meetings are very well run. Now, let's get right into the responsibilities. The board chair is ultimately responsible for the board meeting. That may sound a little bit onerous, but it is the board chair's responsibility, along with the executive committee and the executive director. The board chair wants to ensure that the agenda is appropriate. It's structured properly. It has all the key components that are necessary for the board to deliberate on. They also want to make sure that the information that support the agenda items are compiled and are sent out as well. And they want to make sure that the information is disseminated to all board of directors in a very expedient manner, and preferably quite a bit of time before the board meeting. So let's talk about exactly what the agenda preparation looks like. The board chair will work with the executive committee. Although she is a part of the executive committee, it also includes the vice chair and the corporate secretary. And as well, the executive director will be the resource for compiling information. The first step is the vice chair reviewing the key outstanding items report. And if you're not familiar with that type of report, it is a document that compiles all of the chronological information that the board is reviewing at any one time. And it keeps it up to date. Such things as the strategic plan, or any other priorities that the board has, or any other key items that were discussed at previous board minutes or meetings and included in the minutes, are captured in this report for review. The vice chair would decide and provide recommendations to the board chair on which items should be included and updated at the next board meeting. So that's a very important process and something that each board should have in place. The next person that's responsible for compiling data is the corporate secretary. Now, the corporate secretary has a couple of functions around board meeting preparation. One of the functions is determining which policies, governing policies that should be reviewed. Every governing policy should have a review date attached to it. Some are annually and some are biannually, some may be even every 3 years. It is the corporate secretary's responsibility to determine which of those policies should be included for review and or update by the board and include that on the agenda. In addition, the corporate secretary would identify any items that have been tabled from previous board minutes that need to be updated and provided to the agenda so that it can be acted upon. And they will provide that information direct to the board chair. And finally, the corporate secretary will ensure that the minutes from the previous meeting are accurate and are ready to be provided to the board for approval at the next meeting. And we'll put that into the agenda with the review of the executive director as well. Once this information is all compiled and put in the agenda, then they turn their attention to what the executive director's responsibility is in terms of providing information to the next board meeting. Typically, there are a variety of reports, some periodic and some are basically repetitive, that need to find their way into the agenda. Such areas as the financial reports. Now, the financial reports can be monthly or quarterly, but no less frequently than quarterly. There'd be other information such as the business plan update that the executive director was tasked with. What is the progress and what does that report look like? And is that on a quarterly basis or is that a monthly basis? In addition, there could be some periodic reports like compliance reports, like audit reports, the internal audit, and even preparing for the financial audit at the end of the year. All of these types of reports and others would be included as appropriate into the agenda. Once all of the information is agreed to by the executive committee and the executive director that belongs in the agenda for the next meeting, then the executive director is tasked with compiling all the relevant information that goes with the agenda items. That's very important because all those pieces need to be provided to the board of directors in advance of the meeting so they can review all the information. So once all that information is compiled, the executive director will disseminate that information to the entire board of directors. And a rule of thumb is to provide that information no less frequently than 10 days in advance of the meeting. That gives the board of directors ample time to review it in detail, all the information, so that they can carry on a very informed and meaningful discussion at the board meeting. If the information is not provided, chances are that the discussion will be very, very short and decisions may not be as appropriate as they need to be. That's why it's important to have that information well in advance. The executive director will also be responsible for ensuring the board members understand where the venue is and the timing of the meeting. Now, that is usually captured well in advance through a schedule of meetings that's provided to all board members at the start of the year. But it's a reminder from the executive director that this meeting is being held at this place and at this time. So that way everybody can show up on time and be ready for the meeting so it is functional and ready to go. And all the information has been provided in advance for discussion. Now let's talk about why is it important for all of this to happen again. One of the key areas that many boards take for granted is donors and the funding resources that they have. And these funders want to ensure that the board is functional. And if poor decisions are made as a result of information not getting there in time or not being provided at all, or the meeting's just not being effective or functional, then donors may well withdraw their support. And I have seen this happen all the time, more frequently than you would expect to see. Because donors today want to keep a very close eye on what their money is supporting. And they want to be associated with a very reputable and well-run organization. So please keep that in mind when you're preparing for the board meeting. It should be very strategic, very focused, and very aligned to the vision and mission of the organization. I want to talk about the governing policy for a second. To be effective, for a board meeting to be effective, the governing policy outlining all the key responsibilities and what the board meeting expectations are should be in place at the board level. Many organizations do not have this policy in place, which makes it very difficult to be strategic in your board meeting process. It's important that this be done and approved by the board, and a copy of the board meeting policy should be provided to every board member and reviewed periodically. This gives each member of the board a very good understanding of what the expectations are at the board meeting from them, from the board chair, from the executive committee, and from the executive director. And also when to receive the information, and that all information will be received in advance. And if the information is not being received appropriately, what action they can take to make sure that that does not occur in the future. I want to give you a little example of what I experienced in one of my board directorships. I've experienced a few, and this is just one to sort of highlight the importance of getting all of the information in advance. In this particular board, we had decided on a pretty significant renovation project that was needed, and we did our tendering process to a number of reputable firms. And then we received a compiled list of the answers or responses from these from the tenders that we sent out, and we reviewed these responses to determine who we were going to award the contract to. When it came down to decision time, there's some board members were talking amongst themselves saying they weren't really comfortable with having a decision on this process now because they didn't feel that they had all the information from these responses. Well, as a result, the board went forward with the discussion on the responses and awarded the contract. So you think that was it, and the contract was awarded. A few weeks later, the construction process started, and then a few weeks after the construction process started, we received a letter from an individual who was the president or owner of a company that was one of the tenders. And he just wanted to bring us up to date on to thank us for reviewing his response, but also to let us know that that it was a little unfortunate that the winning bid was related. The owner of the company was related to one of our board members. So right off the bat, we're in a conflict of interest. And if we had have reviewed the information, received all of the information, and reviewed it in more detail, and took the time to do so, we probably wouldn't be set in that particular situation. Unfortunately, that caused a ripple effect in the community, because it doesn't take long in a small community for that information to get out. And it certainly tarnished the board's reputation and that of the organization. So the board had no choice but to revisit that situation, and they couldn't very well just terminate the contract that they just awarded, but they did terminate the construction process temporarily and put it on indefinite hold. This way they took the time to review their situation and how they can remedy the reputational damage that had been caused. It took some time, and the construction process was not revisited for well over a year later, and a new tendering process was done. But it took some time, and it took a lot of discussion with the winner of the award, of the awarded contract, as whether the other people that tendered, and determined that it was in the best interest of everybody if we just put it on hold and re-tendered the whole process at an appropriate time. And that was not done until a good year later. So you have to be very, very wary of this. And it's important to know that if you don't have all the information, it's the board member's responsibility to ask for it. And it's the board chair's responsibility to make sure that all relevant information is out to the board before a key decision or key activity is made. It can put you at considerable reputation risk if it is not. And as I have said before, the board is strictly accountable to the effectiveness of the board meeting. And this is just one other process they need to be wary of. So I want to thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm prepared to answer. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Daryl. As always, lots of information in there. It's pretty safe to say that if you're not prepared for the board meeting, it can cause some major problems down the line, eh?
That is for sure, Jeremy. I have actually seen that happen in more often than not. In many boards I have been a part of, though, I will say that the board meeting process and the board meeting conduct is very diligent, and because of the responsibility and how important it is. But I have been on boards where it is not so, and it's caused some problems, and I just gave you one example of probably several I could give you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to give everyone another couple minutes. We've got a few questions come in, but if you've got some, we've got a little bit of time left. So Daryl, I know one of the conventional business wisdoms is that you prepare for your meeting for as long as the meeting should be. So if your meeting's an hour, you've prepared for an hour. It sounds like there's a lot of preparation involved in these meetings. What would some of the, maybe the general rules of thumb or some of the tips and tricks that people can do to really prepare well for these meetings and it not take forever?
Yes. In board meetings are a very interesting animal in that there are certain areas on the board agenda that would be just sort of a rubber stamp consent because it's repetitive. And you can take that portion of the agenda and just ask if there's any questions in those items because they're on the board meeting agenda at every meeting. And that increases the opportunity to spend more time on other key items. If a particular key item you suspect is going to be of considerable discussion and you may need quite a bit of time, in some cases you can have a separate meeting in that you can just special board meeting that you can just discuss that item. And sometimes that happens, particularly with the example I use with a construction, which is big dollars, big investment that the board's going to be involved in. So you want to really review that, and you could spend an hour just on that. And you may not even come to a decision right away, but at least you've had a good discussion item. And then at the next board meeting, it can be on the board agenda with the rest of the items to give a final approval.
Perfect. So we've got a few questions in here, and I'm going to start kind of going through them here a little bit. If you have questions, if you're unable to make a webinar or you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you're seeing it, put stuff down in the comments, reply to the emails that go out. There's many ways to get a hold of us so that you can get your questions answered by Daryl. So the first one is from just Tom. He only wanted to be called Tom. All right. What can a board member do to ensure the information package is received in a timely manner? You said 10 days, I think, in your...
Yeah, that is a best practice, and it gives board members the opportunity to review, but it also gives the board member an opportunity, if they don't have all the information that they need, and everybody's a little bit different, they can request additional information prior to the board meeting so that they are well prepared and informed before the discussion and decision is ultimately made. If they do not receive the information, it's incumbent upon them to ask for it.
Next question is from anonymous user 1492. This must be a Facebook question. How do I even know if the board agenda is appropriate?
Well, that is a very, very interesting question, actually. And, you know, with all the governing policies that the board would have in place, the board would know that what is important, board members, and what isn't important. And for example, each board would receive a copy of the policies as they've been prepared and reviewed, so they would know what those look like. But they also would have a copy of the strategic plan, for example, and they would know what the strategic plan updates are appropriate and what's happening, so they would be requesting that and would be seeing that. In addition, they would see the key items report with the agenda. So along with the agenda, when it's sent out and key items that are put on the agenda from the key item reports, you would also have a copy of the key items report at each board meeting so you can keep track and record of what's happening there. And if anything that is missing that you want to have on the agenda, you can request that for a future meeting.
Absolutely. All right, last question. And they ask, what can I do as a board member when I don't receive all of the information I need? I think that's a great question, because we all know what it's like when we're preparing for meetings and we've requested information and it doesn't show up. What do I do?
Well, if the information that you requested doesn't show up, it's incumbent upon you to bring that up again, but this time it's right at the board table. And you can say that, suggest that this item be tabled if it's important information is missing. Because the worst thing the board can do is to discuss and vote on a particular item when insufficient data has been provided. It can put the board in a very precarious position if they do so, and the decision is not a good decision. So my suggestion would be to table the information. And at the very least, as a board member, withdraw from the board decision if there are board vote, if that's going to happen, and ask your vote to be recorded that you are not voting on this item because of insufficient data.
I think that dovetails right in nicely with the last webinar we did that talks about what to do with an unruly board member. So if anybody missed that, it's you can find it either on our YouTube channel or up on the d2sup.com website. So yeah, I think that that's a great place to end the conversation there, Daryl. So for those who feel like they either drank from the fire hose today and got a whole ton of information all together, you can catch the replay again on YouTube or soon on d2sup.com. Or, Daryl, we have courses on the D2Sup site that I think deal with a lot of this. Do you know offhand which ones would be the best ones for them to take a look at?
Yeah, this particular one I would focus on the conducting effective business board meetings, and that package has an operating guide for you to review. It also has a video, and it has a sample agenda and some in a sample governing policy for the board meeting. That would be a great place to start, and that particular board package is free to anybody that wants to use it.
And I would say it's even great for people who like to get more hands-on than these webinars can get, where they can actually put in some time with some physical documentation and get their hands dirty a bit and do it at their own pace.
Absolutely.
Very good. All right, folks. I want to say thank you to everyone who's watched and who's been supporting us thus far. And Daryl, thank you once again. I'm sure we'll be back with the next webinar, so keep your eyes peeled on apparently your phones as they ding, and on your emails, because we'll be coming back with more. So thanks, Daryl.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Bye now.